much for that very warm welcome. Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for being here today to celebrate with us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Honourable Billy Kelleher here today, the Irish Minister for Trade and Commerce, and of course Mr. Patrick Scullion, the Consul General of Ireland, my federal and state parliamentary colleagues who are here, particularly the Minister for Planning, Tony Kelly, the Leader of the Opposition, Barry O'Farrell. You start to see a theme in the New South Wales Parliament, don't you? Fortunately, today I can't be joined by Michael Daly, Kevin Patrick Green, Carmel Mary Tebbit. There are a few of us around, aren't there, Tony and Barry? I also like to acknowledge Professor Patrick McGorry, of course, the Australian of the Year, all of our distinguished guests, and if you might just indulge me, a distinguished guest, I'd personally like to acknowledge the distinguished author and distinguished relative of mine, Tom Keneally, here today. And of course, we also acknowledge the Gadigal people who have been custodians of this land. Now, thank you. Mr. Kelleher, Minister Kelleher, I hope you enjoy a most productive and fun stay while you are here. And so I wish you Céad Míle Fáilte. Mr. Speaker. Now, Minister Kelleher, I was going to say what's the crack, but I thought I'd leave that up till later. Minister Kelleher, you are the Trade Minister. You, of course, know that trade between our two countries now valued at some $2.5 billion a year, and that alone is remarkable evidence of the strength of our relationship. But today we celebrate so much more than trade. There's something precious about the history of our two countries, those unique ties of friendship who bind us together in understanding and spirit. And it's fitting we celebrate that here. St. Patrick's Day, the Lansdowne Club, the oldest Irish-Australian business club in this country, a lunch that is acknowledged to be the largest event of its kind throughout the world. So I think we should all be glad we've been invited to this party. Now, being the bearer of a distinctive Irish name has some distinct advantages on this day, and although I must confess, admittedly it is by the great fortune of marriage that I bear the name Keneally, although I can claim some of my own Irish ancestry through my Irish Catholic great-grandmother. There is, however, a Scots-Irish great-grandparent, and we won't talk about him today. However, as the mother of Brendan Patrick Keneally and Daniel John Keneally, it is a great deal in our family to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and of course, I won't try to outdo that most widely read authority on Irish-Australian history, and of course I speak about Tom Keneally. Tom's monumental work, The Great Shame, covers 80 years of turbulent Irish history, years of famine and immigration and transportation to Australia. It is a mighty shadow to stand in as a Keneally, and I won't try to outdo him, but rather to quote him. Tom writes, "Australia was the potential punishment that hung over all protest, political activism, and revolt in the British Empire, over the Chartists of Britain, the French inhabitants of Lower Canada, and the Republicans of Upper Canada, but in particular, it hung over the gestures of power and rebellion in Ireland." Now, there are two things that strike me when I read this statement. First, as an immigrant to Australia myself, a place I love, a place in which I've chosen to raise my own family, the idea of Australia being the punishment seems almost inconceivable. My, how times have changed. Secondly, as the Irish-Australian story does have its roots in the suppression of rights and expression, is it any wonder that the characteristics that many define as Australian seem remarkably Irish? The rebellious humor, the larrikin spirit, the rejection of class, the self-deprecating humor, and a way with words that can be both funny and bitingly accurate, particularly when cutting someone down a peg if they richly deserve it. Is it any wonder that so many Irish Australians have found their way into politics, adding some real wit and repartee to our political scene. Indeed, when an Australian Prime Minister can make such colourful contributions to Hansard as he's all tip and no iceberg, he's wound up like a 1,000-day clock. I was nearly chloroformed by that speech. It nearly put me right out all afternoon. You know it has to be a Keating. Now, the Irish influence on Australian public life goes beyond politics. In arts, academia, and law, it's been spectacular, it's been profound. 50,000 people living in Australia were born in Ireland. Nearly 2 million Australians claim Irish heritage. And around 80,000 passport holders from Ireland are permanent residents of Australia. And whilst I receive the occasional petition to rename Bondi, County Bondi, okay, I made that up, that's not true. The Irish Australian community is actually across Sydney and across our entire way of life. After all, it's in Western Sydney, far from County Bondi, that we find the Penrith Gaels, a local, thriving Irish Gaelic club. And let's not forget the Irish contribution to Sydney FC, Terry McFlynn, or our Irish AFL connection, Ty Keneally of the Sydney Swans. He's also my cousin. No, I made that up too. We should not forget that AFL itself is a hybrid of Gaelic and rugby football, an early example of compromise between British and Irish sensibility. Yes, the Irish have infiltrated almost every aspect of Australian life, just as they have in the country of my birth, the United States. After all, without poteen, how would the Americans have learned to make moonshine? Not that I would know anything about that. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to harp on today. I've said enough as it is. I will simply say once again thank you for an opportunity to celebrate the memory of St. Patrick on this great annual occasion. After more than 15 centuries, St. Patrick's place in the hearts of the Irish people remains undiminished. And just as Ireland's place in the hearts of all Australians will endure forever in this country's story. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, sláinte.